This happened in the spring of 2016. I was 19 years old and had just moved back to my hometown after a failed semester at a big university. I was feeling pretty lost and needed a way to save money, so I took the first job I could find. It was a night shift custodial position at the local community college. The campus wasn't very large, but the library was a massive 3-story building with a basement that housed the archives. My shift started at 10 p.m., just as the last of the students were heading home, and ended at 6 a.m. For most of that time, I was the only person in the entire building. My job was to empty the trash, vacuum the endless rows of study carrels, and make sure the bathrooms were stocked for the next day. I've always been someone who doesn't mind the dark. I actually found the library peaceful at first. The smell of old paper and the hum of the HVAC system were comforting in a way. I'd put in my headphones, listen to some podcasts, and just go about my routine. But after a few weeks, the layout of the building started to get to me. The library was designed with these long, narrow stacks of books that created deep shadows, and the motion sensor lights were notoriously finicky. They would often click on several aisles away for no apparent reason, making me stop and stare into the darkness. The first time I felt genuinely uneasy was about a month into the job. I was vacuuming the second floor, which was mostly quiet study areas and the reference section. As I moved the vacuum toward the back corner of the floor, the power cord suddenly yanked tight. I figured it had just caught on a table leg, so I turned off the machine and walked back to unhook it. When I reached the outlet, I saw that the plug hadn't been snagged at all. It had been unplugged. The plug was sitting neatly on the carpet about 3 feet away from the wall. I stood there for a second, looking at it. I was the only one in the building. The security guard, an older man named Ben, stayed in his booth at the main entrance of the campus and only did a perimeter walk once at midnight. He never came inside unless I called him. I figured the vibration of the vacuum might have just loosened the plug, even though it seemed unlikely given how far away it was sitting. I plugged it back in and finished the floor, but I kept my headphones off for the rest of the night. A few nights later, I was working in the basement archives. This was the part of the library I liked the least. It was cold, damp, and filled with rolling metal shelves that screeched whenever you moved them. I was emptying the trash in the small office area down there when I heard a distinct sound from the back of the room. It was the sound of a page being turned. It was a sharp, crisp sound that echoed in the silence. I stopped what I was doing and looked toward the back stacks. The motion lights were off in that section. I called out a hello, but there was no response. I walked back there, my heart thudding in my chest, and the lights clicked on one by one as I moved. I found nothing. No one was there. But when I reached the very last row, I found a single book lying open on the floor. It was a thick, leather-bound volume on local history. I picked it up and realized it was open to a page featuring a class photo from the 1970s. Someone had circled one of the faces in black ink. The next night, I mentioned the open book to Ben during his midnight walk. He just laughed and told me that the library was old and that the staff probably just left things around. He didn't seem concerned, so I tried not to be either. But as the shift went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I started noticing small changes every time I returned to a room I had already cleaned. A chair would be pulled out from a desk I had pushed in. A window that I had checked and locked would be slightly cracked open. It was subtle, the kind of thing that makes you think you're just losing your mind from lack of sleep. Then came the night of the storm. It was a heavy, torrential downpour that knocked out the power to the entire campus around 2 a.m. The library went pitch black, except for the dim red glow of the emergency exit signs. I was on the 3rd floor at the time. I reached for my flashlight, but as I clicked it on, I heard a sound that made me freeze. It was coming from the stairwell. It was the sound of someone walking up the stairs, very slowly. They weren't trying to be quiet. Each footstep was heavy and deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. I stood at the top of the stairs, my flashlight beam shaking in my hand. I called out, "Ben, is that you?" There was no answer, but the footsteps continued. They reached the 3rd floor landing just on the other side of the heavy fire door. I watched the door handle. It didn't turn. Instead, there was a soft scratching sound against the metal, like someone was running their fingernails down the door.
I backed away into the stacks, my mind racing. I didn't want to be trapped in a corner, so I headed toward the emergency exit. But as I passed one of the rows of books, my flashlight caught something on the floor. It was a trail of wet footprints. They were bare footprints, small and narrow, leading from the back of the library toward the center of the room. I followed the trail with my light, and it led directly to the desk where I had left my backpack. My bag was open and its contents was spilled out across the table. My wallet was there, my keys were there, but my phone was gone. And in its place, sitting right in the middle of my spilled things, was a small hand-drawn map of the library's basement. There was an X marked in a small crawlspace area behind the HVAC units that I had never noticed before. I didn't stay to investigate. I ran for the emergency exit, the alarm blaring as I pushed the bar and sprinted out into the rain. I didn't stop until I reached Ben's security booth. He was startled to see me, and when I told him someone was in the building, he called the police immediately. The officers arrived and searched the library from top to bottom. It took them nearly 2 hours to find what they were looking for. Behind the massive HVAC units in the basement archives, there was a small concealed door that led to a maintenance crawl space. Inside, they found a makeshift living space. There was a thin mattress, several stolen blankets from the college's lost and found, and a collection of food wrappers. But the most disturbing part were the walls of the crawl space. They were covered in hundreds of sticky notes. Each one had a time and a location written on it. 10:15 p.m., emptying trash on floor 1. 11:30 p.m., vacuuming the reference section. 1:45 a.m., restroom break. They also found my phone. It was sitting on the mattress, and when the police checked it, they found that dozens of photos had been taken over the last 2 weeks. They were all photos of me. Some were taken from behind book stacks, some from the ceiling vents, and several were taken of me while I was sitting in the break room completely unawares. The person living there was a former student who had been trespassed from the campus years ago for stalking a faculty member. He had discovered a way to slip into the library during the day and hide in the crawl space, emerging only at night when the building was empty. He had been living there for months, watching the janitors come and go, but for some reason he had developed a specific fixation on me. I quit the job that night. I never went back to the campus, not even to pick up my final paycheck. I moved to a different town a few months later and took a job working in a bright, busy retail store. I still have a hard time with libraries. Whenever I see a long aisle of books or hear the click of a motion sensor light, I feel a cold shiver run down my spine. I think about those sticky notes and the photos on my phone, and I wonder how many nights he had been standing just a few feet away from me in the dark, watching me work, waiting for the power to go out.